Welcome to Vibrant Pittsburgh's Resilience Through Equity series, a conversation with Vibrant Champions panel discussion. I'm Sabrina Saunders Mosby, and I serve as President and CEO of Vibrant Pittsburgh. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am really excited for today's discussion. And before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I want to share a bit of background about how we got to today. In 2019, 50 companies that employ close to 150,000 employees in the Pittsburgh region completed the Vibrant Index Diagnostic Survey. The participating organizations represented a wide variety of industries and organizational sizes, and they answered questions in 9 categories. The diagnostic was designed to provide a snapshot of the practices being utilized by employers in the region, and it provides a foundation for future study. Here are a few things that we learned. Almost half of the participating companies confirmed that no one in the company was responsible for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or that responsibility was led by a singular role. 72% stated that they needed assistance with limiting bias in hiring practices, yet only 30% of the participating organizations provided diversity and inclusion training and education directly to their human resource and hiring personnel. Only 44% were tracking supplier diversity investments. While 86% of our participant companies used employee demographic data to guide decision-making, 54% were sharing that data with their board of directors, but only 12% make it public. Increasing transparency increases accountability, and measurement allows us to establish and meet and then exceed diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, which is why participation in the Vibrant Index is so important. This year's diagnostic period is currently open. We've added a 10th assessment area to address the organizational response to COVID-19 and social unrest. It's free and confidential for regional businesses to participate. We are currently on track to double last year's participation numbers. The diagnostic will remain open through March 19th, and interested companies can contact Vibrant Pittsburgh for details. We used the word catalyst, very intentional in our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. A catalyst, by definition, is an agent that provokes or speeds significant change or action. Organizations that have received the designation Vibrant Champion are intentionally changing the diversity, equity, and inclusion landscape in the Pittsburgh region by leaps and bounds. The use of the Vibrant Champions name is an exclusive benefit for the companies that scored at or above the 95th percentile on our diagnostic. For many companies, diversity, equity, and inclusion have been a vital piece of workplace culture for years. But in 2019, the inaugural Vibrant Index revealed that companies in Pittsburgh who are leading the way with policies and practices help our region thrive. Today, I am pleased to introduce representatives from our 2019 Vibrant Champions. First, Marsha Jones, Executive Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, and McLaughlin, Executive Vice President, Talent Strategy Executive, PNC Bank. Jason Hazlewood, the new managing partner, of Reed Smith. John Galley, Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer, and James Taylor, Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Talent Management Officer, UPMC. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I am looking forward to a wonderful conversation. So let's jump right in, shall we? And for those that are watching in the audience, please make sure you include the grid view so that you can see all of the panelists in the discussion. And that is for the 300 members of the audience that we have joining us today. If you have questions for our panelists, feel free to add them to the Q&A box because we will be answering audience questions towards the end of the discussion. So first, John, welcome this morning. I'm so glad to have you join us today. How are you doing?
Doing well, Sabrina. Always great to see you. Thanks for inviting us to be here. It's a real honor.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, John, each of the organizations that are participating today decided to participate in the pilot year of the Vibrant Index. You currently serve on the Diversity Assessment Committee and as a member of the Vibrant Pittsburgh board. Can you talk to us a bit about why a regional index is important for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Sure. It's a great question and an important one. Let me start by saying, answering in two different ways. First, a generic regional index is important because it provides a great tool for employers like UPMC to actually benchmark ourselves. How are we doing in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion against our peers, against other entities in Pittsburgh? Are we leading? Are we middle of the pack, or are we lagging in some ways? And so I think that's probably one of the most important values of a tool, is it gives you a sense of how you're doing. But it's equally important for the region, so that on a macro level, we can look to see how are we doing as a region. So for example, how many employers are participating in the index? If it's a handful of companies, that says one thing, right? If it's hundreds of companies, then that says something very different in terms of our interest, our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think in those terms, an index like the regional index that you described is really important. I would say the Vibrant Index is special in a number of ways, and the primary way I would describe it is it has some key different kinds of measures that are really important in terms of moving the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. The first is structural. Do you have the right structure within your organization to be successful over the long term? And when I talk about structure, I mean things like, is your board of directors engaged in DEI initiatives? Do you have a committee of the board that is specially focused on this work and holding you accountable as an organization? Do you have a chief diversity office or officer? Or even if you're a smaller employer, do you have a dedicated resource or set of resources to these efforts? And so I think structurally within the Vibrant Index exist those kinds of measures. And that's really important, again, for long-term kind of success. I would say second would be process-oriented measures, and they're embedded in the Vibrant Index as well. And this gets to, are you doing the kinds of things that are going to lead to success over time? And if not, what fundamentally within your infrastructure needs to change? What process needs to change? And then the last one that I would say is outcomes-based. And this may be the most important kind of measure. So when you look at all these efforts, do you have the right structure? Do you have the right process? Well, at the end of the day, are you actually making a difference, in your efforts? Can you point to where you were a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago on key metrics and say, look how much progress we've made? Or we're really struggling here. We need to change things up. It's time for a different strategy. Those are all really important metrics. And fortunately, they have all been embedded into the Vibrant Index. What I'll say the index is not is a static measure. So I've been pleased. The index has only been around now for 2 years, but I've been pleased to see that it's changing even from year 1 to year 2. And that's important because as we grow and progress as a region, the index needs to change. It needs to show that we're refining and enhancing our capabilities. And so to me, the bar, in terms of the index should be going up as the region is seeing success and as each employer is showing success in their efforts. And so it's very much a dynamic type of tool, not something that's static and going to be the same 10 years from now as it was today. So I would summarize it that way. And I just really think if you're an organization looking to make progress and do it in a safe way, because this index doesn't get published to, your own results don't get published anywhere except to you. So it's a safe way, no matter where you are on this journey, and it is a journey, you can get a safe look at where you are and then actually get some help in terms of moving the needle.
John, that's really important to mention, and you're right, and I say that as well. This is a journey, right? We all have entered this diversity, equity, and inclusion journey at various points along the way, and so I think it would be great to bring Marsha into the conversation. Good morning, Marsha. I'm glad to see you this morning. I am really interested in talking a bit more about how we have changed the index. As John mentioned, it is evolving and we're growing. This year, we added a 10th category to the index to capture how organizations responded to the challenges and opportunities related to the pandemic and the spotlight on institutional racism specifically. PNC made a $1 billion commitment to ending systemic racism in this last year. Marsha, can you talk about how you've kept intentionality at the heart of your most recent catalytic DEI efforts?
Thanks very much, Sabrina. It's a pleasure to be with you again, and thank you for including us in this very important discussion. We committed to the $1 billion as part of our evolutionary focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the things that became quite apparent as a result of the activities that were taking place in the middle of last year was the need for us to be able to take a look at how we can actually become even more engaged in the work that we're doing with many of our communities. And so when we made the $1 billion commitment to be able to focus on social injustice, it came with a reorganization of our diversity and inclusion team into a group which we call the Corporate Relationship Group. And we intentionally created that organizational structure for the purpose of enabling us to be able to create intersectionality between our philanthropic efforts with our corporate, our business development efforts in terms of our corporate banking, as well as our diversity and inclusion efforts, because we recognize that all of these actually come together with this intersectionality. We are focused, we believe, in some of the impacts that social injustice have in communities. And so we realize that there is an important role that we play in terms of the development of entrepreneurship, in terms of economic empowerment, as well as the need for us to be able to have wealth creation in many of our communities. And so as a result of that, by bringing these three elements of the organization together, we believe that there's an opportunity for us to be able to help address in a very systematic way some of these injustices that we see. We're coupling this with the opportunity for us to be able to provide additional voluntary activities that our employees are able to participate in. So many of you are probably aware of our Grow Up Great activities that really focus on early childhood education, which we believe are really a linchpin of what we do in terms of supporting our communities. We feel that there is an opportunity for us to continue to expand that type of focus that we have. And Kat, I'm sure, is going to be sharing with you some of the other activities that we have that focus on broader activities that will be able to help to support our communities in addition to our efforts in terms of early childhood education. But the focus, as we talk about this $1 billion, is we recognize that each of our individual markets really are in touch with our communities to be able to have a better understanding of how they can actually impact individually those social determinants of wealth as well as of health. And so therefore, many of our regional presidents will actually be the ones who will be helping us to be able to find those opportunities, to be able to invest in those communities so that we can customize the work that we're actually doing in this $1 billion commitment.
Thanks, Marsha. And we are really excited to see the long-term effects of that kind of investment. I know throughout the country, but also right here in Pittsburgh. And so, Kat, Marsha teed you up quite well there. I'd love to bring you into the conversation as we reflect on, what was a heck of a year. I'm sure I could, categorize it in a variety of different ways. But we've been forced to really rethink what it means to be an attractive city for talent in this time of unrest during COVID-19, being Pittsburgh and transforming who we are externally and internally. And so I'm really interested in talking to you about this idea of attracting and retaining a diverse workforce. You lead talent initiatives at PNC, and we know that attracting and retaining a diverse workforce is an imperative for our region's success, just as the kinds of investments that PNC and other companies are making to help us thrive. What initiatives are you most excited about that will impact diversity, equity, and inclusion in Southwestern PA?
Thanks, Sabrina. I think I'm most excited about the work we're doing to collaborate around talent versus compete around talent. And I'm sure people have heard me say this before, but starting with the Vibrant Index, what John talked about, it gives us a chance to benchmark against each other and understand how we're performing, those of us who participated in the inaugural survey. What excites me about the Vibrant Index is over 50 companies participated, which means 50 companies in our region get that for us to attract and retain talent, we need to understand this and we need to make progress against it. My hope is that in 2021, it's 100 companies, and after that, it's 150, because the more we uniformly send a message about the importance of this topic to our region, the more success all of us will have. So one, I would highlight the collaboration on the Vibrant Index. The second, I would highlight work we've done to collaborate on talent opportunities in the region. So one of the things we know is we have a workforce that we don't have enough people to do all the really high quality jobs that are in our markets. And so what are we doing to attract and interest people in Pittsburgh? And so a number of us, everybody on this call, as well as many others, participated in the Pittsburgh Passport Series that the Allegheny Conference ran for the last 2 summers with the agenda of attracting and retaining college students to the Pittsburgh region. And so the first year we did it, it was wonderful. We probably had about 1,500 interns from our region participating in events all over the city and getting to see Pittsburgh, not just in the company they work for, but everything that our region has to offer. And you can imagine when COVID hit and most of us had to make our internships either go away, in some cases, for a number of us, they went completely online as everything did. We thought we lost the opportunity to showcase Pittsburgh. But what we found out is because we stayed in the game and we changed our approach and made our passport a completely virtual one, is that we actually had more participants last summer than the prior summer. So 1,700 or so people participated. 42%, and I'm probably directionally correct, it might be 43, were people of color, which is an unheard of percentage for our region, right? As much as we're all doing the Vibrant Index, we're not known for seeing that high number of diversity. And so we delivered into the Pittsburgh region 1,700 eager and interested college students who would have been warmed up to consider jobs in our markets. And I think that's just a great example of if we work together and then if we take the next step. So I think about Marsha and I's relationship, right? Marsha leads our diversity and inclusion efforts and equity and inclusion efforts at PNC, but my job is to execute on that from attracting and actually hiring talent. So one of the wins out of the passport for PNC is we met a young man who was at Columbia in New York City, who joined one of the case study competitions, happened to have been a case competition that I was one of the judges for. I was 5 minutes into that conversation and trying to figure out how PNC could get him. P.S. Somebody from BNY Mellon was also on that case competition, trying to figure out how they could get him too. But we reached out and not only engaged this young person, but hired him. And he'll be moving to Pittsburgh without any experience in Pittsburgh. And that's just, if we can do that together, I think we can be exponentially more successful.
Wow, that's so exciting, Kat. Those are the types of stories that we need to be screaming from the rooftops, because we know that this is really happening in the region. I do want to talk about diversification by industry and some of the challenges that we know we faced. Jason, I'm glad to bring you into the conversation, and congratulations on your new leadership role at Reed Smith, first and foremost. Before I jump into the question, I don't know if I'm the only one because I'm used to working with attorneys for a variety of different reasons, but I don't always know the lingo. What's the difference between partner and managing partner?
Okay, great. Well, firstly, thank you for having me, and thank you for the congratulations. I really appreciate it. So managing partners, partners, associates is the level that you come in at. So you're an associate. Then after some time, you hope to be promoted to partner. And then the managing partner is just the one, man or woman who's a partner in the office who sort of oversees the entire office. So it's sort of a director of sorts. And so there's only, one office managing partner per office, where there are many partners in the office.
So basically, congratulations on now ascending to being the boss. I know that comes with a lot.
Yeah, I think it would be a far stretch to call me the boss of anything. I'm not even the boss of the place you see me sitting right now in my home. So I appreciate your kudos, though, all the same. Touche.
Jason, so one of the exciting things that I want to talk about is that Reed Smith actually recently announced something that I want you to talk about that is really amazing in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the challenges. Despite the increased emphasis on diversity and inclusion within the legal field over the past decade or so, the legal profession remains one of the least diverse of any profession, right? So as you were just recently named managing partner at Reed Smith, which is one of our region's largest law firms, can you tell us what the leadership role means for the legal field?
Sure. And so before I touch on that second point, I want to touch on the question itself, actually, because I think it's a common misconception held. So you mentioned the increased emphasis on diversity in the legal industry. So I'm limiting my comments to just the legal industry, because that's where sort of my expertise, I think, lies. And so I think it's just a fallacy to state that there's been an emphasis in the legal industry. Like, we've talked about it a lot, sure, and there's been a lot of chatter about diversity, inclusion in the legal industry, but to say that there's been an emphasis on it, I think is going a bridge too far. And by that, I mean, like, for instance, I had a client last year that in response to the pandemic knew that its revenues would be way down and had to cut its expenses. And so in the course of about 8 to 9 months, they cut $2 billion out of their expenses in response to the pandemic. That is an emphasis on something. They didn't just have a bunch of meetings and a bunch of discussions about how, hey, it'd be really great if we cut some expenses out and it's tough and we don't know what to do. Like, they focused on the goal and they did it. And so the reason why I'm pointing that out is because if we allow this belief to continue that there's been an emphasis, but there's been no progress, that allows people then to believe that, well, maybe there's just no way to solve this. Maybe we're just, we've done everything we can, and this is just an unsolvable problem. And I really want to highlight that just isn't true. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that, unfortunately, because of the horrors that a lot of us watched on our televisions last summer, particularly with the violence against Black people, I think there actually has now been an emphasis in these last 6, 7, 8 months. I mean, one that jumps off the page to me is, some of you might be familiar, Coca-Cola just set forth an initiative, the general counsel set forth an initiative, but basically he put out a set of guidelines that said, listen, For our outside counsel, we want a certain portion of the lawyers that work on our matters to be diverse. And it's very simple. Here are the guidelines. Either you adhere to them or here are the monetary penalties and potential sort of expulsion from our panel that will follow. So it's very clear, it's very easy. Like, that's an emphasis. And so I just wanted to clear that up because I don't want anyone to get the sense of sort of helplessness as if we've been doing this for so long, it's not working. Well, it's not really fair to say we've been doing a lot for a long time. But to the more positive aspect of the question, sort of what does my kind of elevation to this position mean? Well, firstly, I'll say in terms of Reed Smith, I'm very happy to report that I'm not the first. I'm not the first African-American to hold a position in our office. My former colleague and friend, James Barnes, who is now at Blank Rome, had that distinction over a decade ago. So I'd like to say that, Reed Smith has been walking the walk in addition to talking the talk for quite some time now. And what does it mean? I think it's exciting, obviously just not to me because it was me. That's why I say it's exciting. But, in addition to that, I think it helps continue to beat back this rumor that we continuously hear in Pittsburgh that diverse talent isn't here in Pittsburgh. I mean, I know every one of us has heard that time and time again, and it's just flat out nonsense. We are here. There's talent everywhere. You have to look for it, and you have to cultivate it, but it's there. And so I'm hopeful that this is going to be sort of a spark or an example that others in the legal industry, certainly others in the city, will follow, and we can keep sort of this progression going.
Well, we're excited to continue to watch you lead in this space and to engage with you in this new role. Talk to us a bit about the recent announcement that Reed Smith made allowing billable hours credit for diversity and gender-related work.
Yes, so this is really exciting. So this is something, and again, it's going to sound self-congratulatory to my firm, but I'm happy to congratulate my firm on this because I think they're amongst the first to have done this that I've seen. And so at a firm, just to give you the 30-second breakdown of how a law firm works, all the lawyers, you have to bill a certain number of hours a year. Like, that's what we sell, right, is our time and our advice. And so you have to do things on a billable hours basis. So at the end of the year, Jason has to have billed X number of hours. Well, typically in the past, things like diversity and inclusion and things of that nature, firms will encourage you to do it. They say it's really important, but they don't give the lawyers billable hour credit. So ostensibly what they've been asking is that, listen, we want you to do all your legal work, and then in your spare time, we want you to do this D&I work. Now, obviously for a lot of people, they still take it very seriously, and it's just a personal commitment that they make, but that's not true necessarily for everyone. The reason why I think it's important is now is for the first time the firm has decided that they were going to allocate billable hour credit to do that work. And so to me, that's really the quintessential example of putting your money where your mouth is. All right. And so they've said that they're going to give every lawyer, associates, partners, everyone, 50 hours of DE&I for billable credit. So, that's about a little over a week. Right. And so you're taking 1 week of every lawyer in the firm's time and saying, we are willing to forego the billable hours and the money that you would have brought in advising clients through that 1 week. We're willing to forego those monies in exchange for you being devoted and spending that time on furthering our DE&I goals. And to me, there's nothing louder from a law firm than that. Right. And because I say, kind of jokingly all the time, I hope all my partners, and I think all my partners care about diversity and inclusion, but I know all my partners care about money. And so while, when they're willing to actually put their money where their mouth is, there can be no truer sign to me that there's a belief and a desire from the leadership and the partners of the firm to work towards and achieve this goal.
What a wonderful idea, Jason. And I hope that we see other firms follow suit in this particular way. The peer pressure alone hopefully gets them moving in the right direction to follow your lead. That actually makes me think about just innovation in this space in general. And James, I would love to invite you in as we transition the conversation just a bit, but on the lines of coming up with great ideas. UPMC has a long history of investing in inclusion work and creating significant change and success with diversity, equity, and inclusion. James, can you actually talk to us a bit about how 2020 reinvigorated your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at UPMC?
Sure, glad to, Sabrina. First, allow me to say what a delight and honor and a pleasure it is being here with Vibrant Pittsburgh today, and certainly alongside my distinguished panelists. To your question, Sabrina, 2020 really did allow us at UPMC an opportunity to sharpen our focus, right? So on one hand, we can say and we can tout with pride that we're not new to this, as the young folk would say, right? We have a rich history of diversity progress at UPMC. And so before the lights of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor became household names, and they became household names for all the wrong reasons, we can say, and we can say with pride, that we were driving a diversity and inclusion agenda to advance issues such as health equity and workforce diversity and underserved community engagement, right? John mentioned earlier our board inclusion and diversity committee. We established this committee of the board in 1996, right? And we still have this, again, board committee in place to provide governance and direction to our overarching system-wide diversity strategy, right? So I use that as an illustration. Additionally, I would say in 2016, 5 years ago, through the leadership of John Galley, right? We developed an organizational-wide goal to increase representation of women in executive roles by 20% and people of color in executive roles by 40% over a 5-year period, right? And I share these illustrations as mere examples, and I'm barely scratching the surface of substantive and intentional efforts that we've had in place well beyond or before 2020. Now, having said that, on the other hand, 2020 was also a reminder for all of us in this region that we have an opportunity, right? We've got work to do. There's more work for us to do. Let's not forget the lessons learned through the Pittsburgh Inequality Report, or lessons learned through COVID-19, or certainly lessons learned through racial unrest. Opportunities were plentiful for us to reinvigorate our diversity efforts within the organization. So for me, the blessing and the disaster of 2020 is that conversation about structural racism and health disparities, for example, were no longer isolated conversations that only us who were diversity practitioners had, right? So these conversations became so mainstream that you couldn't turn on the evening news, or better yet, you couldn't commute to your office without seeing firsthand the frustration of so many individuals, self included, who took to the streets proclaiming that something just isn't right here. And so consequently, as a result of 2020, we at UPMC had the opportunity to do a couple of things. First, refine how we go about studying health disparities. So our objective in this space is to best link culture to healthcare outcomes. And naturally, we understand the impact of conditions in the environment that go about promoting good health beyond medical care delivery, right? Factors like social and economic opportunities and resources that are available in different neighborhoods throughout Pittsburgh. And so we've had an intentional focus on health disparities related to primary care and cardio care and maternal and child health, each of which was highlighted as an opportunity for the broader region in the inequality report. Lastly, I'll say from a workforce perspective, bear in mind that we've got over 90,000 employees across our organization, so scale matters for us, right? We've undertaken drastic efforts over the last 6 to 9 months or so. For example, I'll share with you that diversity awareness and training isn't an optional effort for us if you work at UPMC. So on 2 separate occasions over the course of each year, our employees are required to participate in mandatory diversity learning, one of which is linked to our performance management process. Secondly, we all know that regardless if you're a physician or if you're an environmental service worker, no one impacts the experience of our employees like their direct supervisor, right? And because of this, we facilitated a local quarterly update by business units of what we refer to as our employee life cycle by gender and by race, of what we consider to be the most impactful periods of an employee's experience with us. So now hiring managers can assess if disparities exist within their own workforce, looking at their data, looking at who they hire or who they promote, or performance ratings or other critical touch points that are important factors in an employee's experience within the organization.
Wow, having that data is so vitally important, and it was just another good reason to invite organizations to participate in the index. You have the information available, and it also it can inform the decisions that you make to help advance this work in vital ways. I want to stick with you and bring Marsha in back into the conversation, if that's okay, James. As you both are working in this space directly of diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we were led in the conversation. It's been said in a variety of different ways that we must first learn the rules before we break them. As a new mom, I'm not really sure if I want to subscribe to that just yet, but I've heard it before. Can you both provide some advice to organizations beginning their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey? What DEI rules must be followed? Are there any diversity, equity, and inclusion rules or practices that can be broken even in the beginning? Both James and Marsha, I would love for you to chime in.
Sure, a couple of thoughts from this end. I don't know if it's advice, but certainly some lessons that have been learned along the way. I've had the privilege of being a diversity practitioner within healthcare for 20 years now. And so in part, it's through trial and error, right? But there have been some learnings learned along the way. I think first I would share that it's important to really be able to frame and define for your organization what diversity means for you, right? Because in my experience, everyone else will attempt to define it for you and what you should be measuring and the work that you should be doing. And we know that diversity, as has been noted throughout this discussion, diversity is a journey. And there's so many critical touch points along the way in so many ways in which you can tackle and slice this work. So I think it's important during early stages of being able to define what diversity means for you and your organization and how you are working to advance your diversity agenda. Secondly, and someone noted this earlier, the importance of transparency, right? Being transparent with your data, being transparent with your processes, being transparent with your decisions. That is critical and important, I think. So oftentimes we have the concern and the thought of, I don't want to share my data because our data doesn't look great, right? And I can tell you that the transparency and the momentum and the honesty in being and revealing that data or your processes has been a lesson for me that, again, I've learned over the course of time that I've been a diversity practitioner managing this work. Thirdly, I would share the importance of measuring outcomes, not effort, right? Effort is important and you need to try, but oftentimes you don't get credit for trying, right? How are you measuring the work and the momentum and the progress that you're making? You know, what are the outcomes that are goal specific, right? John and I are very clear about wanting to increase representation by X percentage, or wanting to shift within an organization and having quantitative measures for what success will look like. And I'll say lastly, before learning from Marsha's experience, I don't think you can break the rules early on, at least through my lens and experience. I don't think you can break the rules early on until you first gained a bit of collateral, right? I think you gain the momentum and you have some wins under your belt, which from my perspective, the momentum comes from advancing great work, right? In accruing a degree of win. And after you've got a number of wins under your belt, you know, then you've got collateral to spend, right? You've got collateral to then negotiate and break some rules and suggest we're going to go about it this way, right? Because now we've got a track record of what success looks like that from my perspective or experience has been important in deciding when and when not to break rules.
Thanks, James. Marsha, what are your thoughts?
So coming from a different line of business into diversity and inclusion, the perspective is a little different in the sense that as we began to think about diversity and inclusion for our organization, and this is for any organization, and James alluded to it, every corporation has its own culture. And so what you first have to identify as you're beginning to have this conversation, first of all, is to make sure that there is buy-in at the top of the house, and that there is authentic buy-in at the top of the house, and that it isn't necessarily just word of mouth to be able to say we're doing this because this is something that is in vogue. It really has to be something that the top of the house and the extended top of the house in terms of executive committee and others that are making decisions really have to authentically buy into the reason and the rationale that the organization is going after it. You then have to be able to hold a mirror up to the organization and very candidly say, where are we in this journey that we've actually alluded to? And recognize the fact that everyone starts somewhere. And you may be at the very beginning of the journey, you may be further along in the journey, but wherever that is, it is important for you to recognize that where you are, and then to be able to articulate what strategies are actually you can in fact put in place that is going to help the entire organization to be able to move ahead. You're going to have to recognize, of course, that there is a work that has to be done throughout the entire organization, meaning even though the top of the house might decide that this is something that they want to do, you do have other constituents throughout the entire organization that have to be brought along. And so as a result of that, you have to be thinking about what is it for the grassroots folks to be able to embrace an inclusive culture? What is it for the mid-level managers to be able to embrace an inclusive culture? Because as we know, that's really where you get to the challenges because things are working well the way they are. Why should we have to actually begin to change them? I would agree with James when he indicates the fact that you can't necessarily break too many eggs in the beginning, because what's going to happen is that you will lose, in a sense, your credibility. You really have to be able to be in a position where you are able to demonstrate what's in it for everyone within the organization as to the reason why an embrace of diversity and inclusion is important, to be able to bring awareness in terms of where they currently are, and then to map out a strategy that candidly, in terms of managing expectations, takes a long time or takes several years. It isn't something that you're going to be able to switch the light on. It's not something that you're going to be able to take a silver bullet to be able to solve or a magic pill, so to speak. It is something that has to be worked on an ongoing basis, and that has to be consistent. And take pride in the small wins that you have, because that is really where you get the energy to be able to continue to move forward.
So true. So very true. Thank you both for those nuggets of wisdom. Thank all of you for your insights. I am so pleased to know each of you, and happy to transition to the second component of this particular conversation, and that's some questions from the audience. We actually do have a few questions from the audience that have been presented, and some that have already been answered, by the way. So thank you for your thorough responses early on. I will be transitioning to my colleague, Laura McKnight, who serves as my COO and Vice President of Programs and Services at Vibrant Pittsburgh. I just want to remind those in the audience that you do have the ability to ask questions of the panelists if we have enough time, obviously. So please use the Q&A box to ask your questions. Laura, are you ready to take it away?
I am ready. And Marsha, I love how you teed me up here, because we have a great question about that authentic buy-in at the top. Victoria submitted a question about creating more diverse executive teams. And we know that this takes time. We know that this is an intentional effort that is not going to happen overnight, but what can we do to speed up this process? Are there any things that you've seen that have really helped elevate this and make this happen more quickly, diversifying our executive teams and our boards?
So I will begin the conversation, but I'm sure Kat's going to want to join in here as the representative and director of talent for us. I would share from my perspective that one of the most impactful ways that we have begun to be able to enhance diversity within our teams is, again, the authentic dialogue that Bill Demchek brings to the conversation. Bill is able to demonstrate from his own personal experiences the impact that a diverse culture has actually had. He participated in a diverse team at an organization prior to him coming to PNC. And so he is able to, as we all know, is a great way of learning and sharing experiences, to be able to tell stories. And so he can tell these stories from his personal experience that demonstrate the value of a diverse team and the diversity of thought and the benefit that that has actually brought. So when you have an executive that is so focused on this, you then are able to influence those that are reporting to him, but then also those that are focused on diversity and inclusion and talent, et cetera, across the organization, as to how do you bring this vision to life within the organization. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kat, who can give you a little bit more detail in terms of the strategies that we've put in place to address that.
It's funny, Marsha, because when I read the question, the word that came to mind was courage. And so Bill demonstrates courage and authenticity, but in return, I would say many of our colleagues have demonstrated courage by being willing to have a pretty direct conversation with our leaders about their concerns about the amount of diversity at the top of the house and what they could do in partnership with us to make a difference. So I think it takes a little bit of courage on both sides to really have the honest and direct conversation on this topic. But to support people's courage, we try to use, as James talked about, every data and metric or analytical tool in our tool belt to understand where our opportunities are, how we can drive these conversations forward. So, you know, companies as big as PNC have pretty well-defined talent programs. And we review our talent on an annual basis and sort of try to think about who's up and coming in the company, who we should put into leadership programs, who we think is ready for the next opportunity. And we look at all of that data with a lens on diversity for women, people of color, and by the way, the segmentation of people of color. And we try to make sure that there's equity across those conversations for our employees. And when there's not, it allows a conversation for, again, a courageous conversation for either my HR colleagues, me or Marsha or one of our HR business partners, our business leaders to say, hey, you know, we're seeing something that's off, and what are we going to do to work together to solve it? And as we've gotten to know our data, and I would say we know our data inside and out, we see these moments in our employees' careers, and it has to do with our career level structure, and we could be here for days if I tried to explain that. But we see these really important moments in our people's careers where we lose them. And it happens to be at these critical times when they're about to be promoted to that next level, kind of first level manager, or to that big senior leadership manager. And so because we know our data, because we understand our challenges, we're able to be much more surgical about going in at those levels and providing the insight or support or development conversation or talent conversation that's needed to hopefully retain and get those folks moving up in our company. So I'll just go back to say, I think it's courage to be honest in the conversations. It's about really owning your data and understanding where your challenges are. And then it's about really pushing people to get into the uncomfortable space, saying, hey, we're noticing you're not having as much success. What can we all do to support you to have more success with whatever the population might be?
If can I add in something quickly here, just as sort of a commercial for two initiatives that I'm aware of that directly speak to what we're talking about here in terms of executive levels and board levels. So on the board level, you know, I wholly agree with both Marsha and Kat, especially on the long-term planning and how it is. But in terms of the short term, there are folks in both sort of groups that are ready to go right now. And so there's an initiative that started by David and Darlene Motley here in Pittsburgh, the African American Directors Forum. And that focuses on getting more African Americans onto public and national boards. They started this 4 years ago, and they have a national association and group of African American directors. And so, to the extent anyone's looking for sort of a jump start on this process, the Motleys are already running with the torch. And so, feel free to reach out directly to them. And if you don't know them, feel free to reach out directly to me, and I will get you connected to them. In terms of the executive leadership, many of you, I'm sure, know or are familiar with TALI, the Advanced Leadership Institute that's being run by Evan Frazier, which is the same thing on the executive side. And so I believe they're going into their third year now. And so to anybody who wants to speak to Evan, he would be more than happy to talk to you about placing executives. And anybody who doesn't know Evan wants to talk to me, please email me and I'll get you connected to Evan. But those are two great organizations right here in Pittsburgh that are picking up this exact task and really have a head start. So if anybody's looking to get a jump start into sort of free ride on their efforts, which I always encourage, you should reach out to me or them directly. Thank you.
Jason, thanks very much for giving us the plug relative to TALI. As one of the chairs, I really appreciate the plug, number one, and expect a conversation with us for a sponsorship on Reed Smith, now that you're a partner.
Noted.
I love it. And I love that we're having a conversation about these long-term and short-term efforts and how we need to work together to really push all of this forward wherever we are in our journey. And I wanted to throw this out to all of the participants here. We have a question about assessing your organization's readiness. And I think that this is a common stumbling block, really knowing when your organization is ready to jump in, how to know how to begin. What are some thoughts? John, do you have any thoughts about an organization and how they can know where to start?
Well, I think Kat hit on it in terms of, you have to be willing to challenge the status quo. And that requires a certain amount of bravery to start the conversation. And I remember in 2016, when we conceived of the idea of setting and promoting and publishing goals around executive diversity at UPMC, it started with conversations that James and I had with every executive at UPMC, every one of our divisional leaders, hospital leaders, health plan leaders, and our board committees, and challenging the status quo that we had done great things, but we really wanted to step up our efforts further and set some challenging goals for ourselves. And so it starts with those conversations, being willing to have them directly, taking the feedback, the concerns that may come along with setting a bold goal, which James and I often encourage, is like, let's set goals that are bold. Let's set goals that are thinking big and taking big steps. And we may stumble along the way, and that's okay. We'll learn from it and we'll get better and we'll figure out how to do it a different way, perhaps. But one of the things that we found is when we had these conversations, nearly everyone was on board from the onset. There were certain areas that we needed to, bring along further than others, but we were able to pretty quickly get everyone onto the same page. But we also found that our processes weren't set up for success. So part of it is looking at what you're doing. What are your recruitment practices for hiring executives? And, from an HR perspective, if you're doing a great job of succession planning, but you don't have great diversity going down your ranks, well, then that can actually harm your efforts to bring in diverse talent. So you have to be balanced about these things. And we were very intentional, as James put it, in contracting with a diverse search firm so that we could bring great talent to UPMC from across the nation. And we found that to be very successful. We've had We've been building success on success in bringing great talent to the region, and also promoting great talent from within. So it's that balance that really makes it work. And we're at the point now where we're encouraging, we always encourage, but our operational leaders get this, they understand this, they know that for us to survive as an organization and to thrive, we need to be more diverse than we are today. If you look at demographics across the U.S. is getting more diverse. That's a good thing. But this region is going to be left behind if we don't do something now. And so that urgency, that sense of wanting to help lead the change in the region is there. It's embedded within each of our operational leaders. And so, but I would say, you know, you've got to be willing to start those conversations somewhere. And it does start with, I think, one-on-one kind of discussions about how to move the needle.
I completely agree. And we have so many questions that are still in our Q&A, and I will endeavor to reach out to you and get some answers for you for those that we aren't able to get to. We only have a couple more minutes. So I want to know, as our last question, how are your organizations establishing trust and buy-in internally for the underrepresented groups in our region? We really need to advance D&I here in our region with those that are here and those that are coming here. So how is that trust being built from your organization's perspective?
If that's an open question to anyone, I'll jump in. I know one of the things we've done, Laura, is employee resource groups, and we have one that I just love. We call it the Diversity Leadership Network, and it's a diverse network of leaders at all levels within UPMC, from top leadership on down. And it's such a great group to get to. They get together regularly, and we talk about where we're heading, directionally, what's next. And they not only provide us great feedback on that, but they also have great ideas. And so, you know, we're not just coming up with what's the next great thing. We're listening to our employees, our diverse employees, and specifically underserved minorities, and getting their ideas and their thoughts. And so when they see that translate into action, that creates trust, that creates a buy-in. And just a quick example, we were focusing on vaccine distribution. Of course, huge issue for the country. We don't have enough vaccine. It's a big frustration for everybody. And we wanted to make sure that our underserved communities were not getting left out, as had happened in the past. And we, of course, had learned a lot about vaccine hesitancy. So we wanted to talk to the Diversity Leadership Network, and it affirmed much of what we had believed, that, you know, the history in healthcare with, you know, just treating Blacks in particular horribly, and the experiments that were done. And you don't have to go back 50 years. I mean, there are plenty of things that have happened more recently than that create this natural distrust and this natural hesitancy. And so how to overcome that? One of the great messages that we got from the Diversity Leadership Network is, you know, your message is so full of hope. Bring the joy in your messages to the community. And we learned that who delivers the message is just as important as the message itself. But I love this idea of, you know, this vaccine is a message of hope. It's reuniting families. It's bringing grandmother back together. You know, it's bringing, you know, mom and dad back. And so bring the joy in your messaging. Make sure that doesn't get lost. And it's those kinds of insights that that we really love to get from, you know, from organizations like the DLN, and we put them into action.
You know, it is so refreshing to actually be able to end on that note. One, as John brings us into, I think, the hottest topic in the world right now, of course, but also to leave us on a note of hope. And I have a ton of hope as it relates to our diversity, equity, and inclusion journey in Pittsburgh, with each of you leading in your respective roles. We are glad to have you as partners and as members of our Vibrant Pittsburgh community in a variety of ways. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time to engage with our audience, to work with Vibrant Pittsburgh on the index, and of course, for sharing today. So thank you so much to our Vibrant Champions and their representatives, Caitlin McLaughlin and Marsha Jones, as well as Jason Hazlewood, John Galley, James Taylor. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to remind everyone that we have a open diagnostic in the Vibrant Index that you can still opt into. The Vibrant Index closes on March 19th. Information on participation is on your screen. Please reach out to Vibrant Pittsburgh if you have any questions. And with that, have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
Thank you.